In early August, Ontario announced that sports and clubs for students could resume with COVID-19 precautions in place. But since kids have returned to their classrooms, it's been a very mixed picture. To help us know more, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Dean Kriellaars, Associate Professor in the University of Manitoba's Department of Physical Therapy at the College of Rehabilitation Sciences. In London, Ontario, my hometown, Michelle Lange, Athletic Coordinator for Thames Valley Regional Athletics. And in Richmond Hill, Ontario, George Kourtis, Health and Physical Ed, Athletics, Wellness, Program Coordinator for the Toronto District School Board. Hi to all of you. If anyone has an opportunity, look up George Kourtis on breakfast television because that video will have you smiling from ear to ear. Thank you for being on the program. Before we start our discussion, I just wanted to explain what's been happening in the province of Ontario when it comes to extracurricular activities. Since September, schools have returned to full-time in-person instruction, and as far as the Ontario government was concerned, that meant, with some modifications, extracurricular activities as well. Both high and low contact activities are permitted outdoors without masking. Indoor high and low contact sports are also permitted, but students are encouraged to wear masks when they can be worn safely based on the activity. Clubs were also permitted outside with physical distancing and inside with masking and distancing. George, I wanted to start with you. Do you have any sense of how many schools in the TDSB are offering extracurricular activities?
So in the fall season, if we compare it to previous fall years, it was a very low amount. It equaled to about 10% that offered inter-school activities. But most schools focused on starting off with whole school approaches and intramurals. So let's take baby steps before we head into full out competitions from school versus school. So most of our schools started with just focusing on all the students in their school through intramurals.
And it must feel
And as we approach the winter season, those numbers I'm sure may increase.
And it must feel good to kind of have some of that back, doesn't it?
Well, smiles on kids' faces, absolutely, and kids being physically active. Starting off from recess to continuing on through before school, during lunch, and after school activities, absolutely.
Michelle, you're in the Thames Valley School Board in London, Ontario. What's the situation like there?
Yeah, so I just want to echo what George has said in regards to our elementary athletics. We started slow, similar to what the Toronto District School Board did, where we offered more intramurals, and we started to increase doing outside of that. So we've just started with volleyball, and we're just finishing cross country. With our secondary programming, Thames Valley, as well as the London District Catholic School Board, we were the first two school boards to mandate a double vaccination policy in the province. So we were able to move forward on September 17th with a full complement of all of our fall sports. And that included golf, field hockey, volleyball, basketball, football, and cross country. So, and again, just to reiterate what George said, when I see the smiles and I hear the whistles and the squeaking of the shoes on the gym floor, there really is nothing better than watching those kids engage with their peers and their coaches.
I remember that squeaking because I used to play basketball. But, Dean, we are in a pandemic. Principals are working hard to keep their staff and students safe. Why should we care if kids can play extracurricular activities?
Movement is the foundation for children to interact socially, to develop psychologically, and to develop physically. And so suppression of movement is something we want to avoid at all costs. And indeed, it's even against the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which we're signatories to in Canada, that we want to develop the whole person, not just the mind. Mind and body are part of that. So having an appropriate physical education system, having an appropriate recess system, having an appropriate intramural sport and performing arts system is not a second. It should never be second to literacy and numeracy. It should be on equal footing, which I'm hearing both from Michelle and George. The problem with the movement part is that there are more moving pieces, if you like, and the planning of that is much more difficult than in class sessions. And that's why you see this big diversity across school boards and divisions between their implementation strategies.
Just even the word itself, extracurricular, it kind of implies as if this is something extra, maybe like a dessert at the end of a meal, not necessary.
Mhm.
Do you think that we need to reconsider that?
100%. It is vital that movement is not put on a second stage setting. It must be equal footing to numeracy and literacy, because if you're not developing the movement capacities of children, they won't engage in extracurricular activities, they won't engage in vocation or activities of daily living. And if you turn a child's belief off from the value of movement by adult implementation, you're basically harming the child, which will show up years later in non-communicable diseases, in depression, etc. So this is not a minor issue. It is a critical factor in the development of children.
Um, I, I wanted to just touch on a word that you used right there, harming. I don't know if a lot of people actually thought that this is harming children. In what ways is it harming children?
Children tell us, my research studies this exactly, and children tell us that movement is the most important thing in their life, related in school, at home, and with friends. And as a result of that, movement becomes a vehicle of development of the child. And if you suppress movement, you decrease self-esteem, you decrease confidence, you decrease competence, you decrease enjoyment. And these are critical factors in being lifelong physically active people.
I asked Michelle and George both what was happening in their districts. You're in Manitoba. How are extracurriculars being handled there?
We're basically uh, fully operational in our system here. There's, of course, constraints to some activities, but we had a full outdoor-indoor complement, which I'm sure is happening in some schools in Ontario as well. But most programs, because we have staff in Manitoba like George, those people can then do the homework to do the necessary thinking on how to have adequate safety for their children. And that then permits the physical activities to occur. Most principals, maybe superintendents, often create a notion of surplus safety, which surplus safety is a terrible notion. And again, I can see George and Michelle shaking their head. Surplus safety harms children because it may stop some immediate small things from happening, but it prevents all of the benefits downstream. So adequate safety in this mindset is what we need, not surplus safety. Not safe as possible, safe as necessary.
George, I saw you nodding your head there, and there are some schools. I know for my kids' schools, they don't have any extracurricular activities. First of all, I wanted to know why you were nodding, and why are these activities not being prioritized by the TDSB?
Sure. So the nodding was due to frustration, but it's also a challenge. We have to provide opportunities for our students and for children, as Dr. Kriellaars has indicated. The research there, it goes on and on. But we have to do that in a safe and caring manner. And I believe we have done, and we have given opportunities. What we need to also focus on is letting parent guardians, letting administrators, letting senior staff know that, hey, we've abided by the Ministry of Health, we've abided by Toronto Public Health, we've abided by the sporting organizations. Here is how we're moving forward. And how we're moving forward isn't necessarily how it was. There are some great takeaways that we can take from the past 19 months. And we've learned from that. But we've got to let parents and guardians know that in order for their children to reach their academic potential, they need to be active. Mm-hmm. Every parent wants their child to be safe, to be healthy. But in order to do so, they need to have that physical literacy. They need to have those physical opportunities to be active both during the day at school and afterwards.
You use the word frustration because when the school year started, the province said that extracurricular activities could return, but then Toronto Public Health said not so fast. And then around, I think, September 20th, they said that it was fine. Is that the frustration that you're talking about?
Absolutely. And then this frustration stems from the Ministry of Education will put out quite a bit of information, but we'll say, well, you have um, final decisions reside with your local public health agencies, and working with our local public health agencies with like TPH, incredible staff. But we also have 600 schools, and to implement things, we can't have decisions made the day before school starts. We can't have decisions made on September 20th and expect a turnaround of September 21st. So being aligned has been one of the difficulties. Having schools like the independent schools in the city of Toronto who do not have to abide by the local public health and have to abide by the provincial, then it has parent guardians saying, how come this school is allowed to offer things, but the Toronto District School Board is not? And explaining that to the parent guardians of our 250,000 students is a little bit of a tough task.
Well, would you say then that the Toronto Public Health has surplus safety?
I think they are the specialists in their field. We're the specialists in education, and I think there needs to be further discussions together.
Michelle, I saw you nodding as well.
Yeah, I echo both. And I think another part of the puzzle that sometimes gets missed is that we have unions as well. So you have unions, teachers' unions that come into play. So we've got boards of education, we've got the Ministry of Education, we've got our public health units, and then we have our unions. And at times, and still happening, those four people are not speaking to one another. So this leads to where George and I sit. We are the communicators to our communities, to our athletic directors, to our coaches. And so we are taking all of this information in, ensuring that we have safe environments for not only our students, but our coaches and our officials as well. So we are trying to mitigate all of those risks while taking into account all of the different people that come to the table that don't seem to be talking to one another and aren't aligned with one another. So I felt like it has been a balancing act from the beginning. And I'm very, very thankful for the other Ontario athletic coordinators that we are on, a group together where we are trying to navigate and stay ahead of the curve to be able to communicate the most accurate information that we have at this time.
And you mentioned before that in order for kids to participate in these activities, both kids and the coaches have to be double vaxxed. Was there any pushback to that?
Yeah, we did experience a little bit of pushback in regards to the amount of time that we gave student athletes to be able to get their double vaccination. We did give them a period of time to be able to at least have that first dose with a double rapid antigen test produced bi-weekly, and then they were to have the second dose by November 1st. Once we implemented that and amended that, there seemed to be, there was breathing. But again, I want to come back to the fact that everybody really at this point in time was trying their best to create sporting opportunities for students, coaches, and officials that were safe. And so when we made that amendment, there was definitely a breath there.
And George, do you think this is something that the TDSB should implement for students and coaches to be double vaxxed?
The discussion is currently taking place, and it started at the beginning of September. Coaches were surveyed. Teacher coaches want it in place. We just are trying to figure out all the equity issues that go along with putting a policy like this in place to ensure that we're providing all of our students with opportunities. And it may look different for students, different in schools, but it is something that we are definitely pursuing, and something that we're trying to make both parent, guardians, students, and teachers feel as comfortable as possible while providing these comfortable and safe while providing these opportunities.
And Dean, it's you can see that all the adults in the room are trying to do what's best for everybody and for kids. You've studied this, but how have kids' activities level been affected by this pandemic?
We've measured that, and what we see in general has been a 65% reduction in physical activity overall in the early stages of the pandemic.
Does that scare you?
Very scary, because not only was there a reduction in physical activity, which is all the well-demonstrated benefits downstream, we noticed that the parents also noticed in their children a decrease in physical literacy, which is the competence and confidence to move in all environments, which is essential as a Canadian to have. And finally, we measured in children that their beliefs in the value of movement eroded in school, at home, and with friends. That wasn't due to what they were trying to do. That was due to us as adults implying this movement suppression, which should never have happened, because there are ways, or intelligent ways, to go around this and provide these opportunities. Once again, movement should never be second to any academic. It is an academic issue in and of itself.
I've been fighting with my kids to get off the tablets, and they'll counter, when you wanted me to be on online school, you were okay with me to be on the tablet, but now you don't want me to because I'm trying to get them outside. At the very beginning of the pandemic, I think everybody was just trying to make sense of the world turning upside down. Do you think, though, we might have been short-sighted in the sense that what we did in the short term is going to be felt in the long term, and in what ways?
Yeah, I think George had it right, and Michelle stated, we need a group of people around the table that doesn't just involve education, but involves health and many other sectors. And that just didn't happen, because we were thinking about the health care system, not the health system. We in education are the health system. We provide the opportunities for movement for children, and that's not part of the health care system, which is what the motivation was behind COVID. Into the future, we need to realize we need strong interactive dialogue that allows us to plan appropriately for these circumstances. And so that's a lesson that needs to be learned into the future. I was very disappointed worldwide in the fact that we will allow our children to die slowly, as opposed to have some small negative effect being squashed with surplus safety. So I'm very, very big proponent that we need to value movement in all its components in schools equal to everything else. And if you don't have that valuation, it's not just do sports to get better grades. If you have a young teenager in the last 19 months who was physically active and then all of a sudden becomes non-physically active, their future may be lifelong interrupted because they're out. And that group of kids that are out psychologically and physically are very different to bring back into the game.
Something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Something that you just said. I'm sorry to step on your. Something that you said just kind of took my breath away when you said that we're allowing our kids to die slowly.
Yeah, I mean, this is always an issue worldwide. Physical inactivity has been diminishing for 50 years, and we've had now another large kick in the teeth related to dropping that as well. So you have to balance the risks in the short term and the long term. Not having a child harmed imminently must be balanced against not moving and then hurting that child severely in the medium and long terms. We don't like seeing anybody harmed in the immediate things. And COVID has shown us that we react powerfully if things are prominent and pressing. But if you have an insidious situation like this that slowly erodes health and then results in serious long-term negative outcomes, people don't react quickly, and we should be reacting as fast as we did for COVID death.
Michelle?
Yeah, I feel the exact same way, and again, as he is speaking, I've got a lot of thoughts, and some of those thoughts come back to our students that are in underserved populations, and as well as newcomers to our country. And the third thing that I think about is women and young girls. And I wanted to ask Dave if what were the numbers in compare, because you said 65%. Do you have a breakdown of those numbers with girls to boys? I would be interested to know
Okay,
that.
we'll do that afterwards, but I'm glad you
Oh,
brought up,
shoot.
yeah,
Okay.
but you brought up, I'm glad you brought up girls, because I did want to shift gears a little bit, because later on in the program, I'm going to be speaking to Perry King to talk about his book about recreational sports. And in it, he talks about a study that shows that 1 in 3 girls drop out of sports during adolescence, while 1 in 10 boys drop out during that time. And Michelle, and these are pre-pandemic numbers. Why do you think that happens, Michelle?
Well, there are many barriers to young girls in sport, and the biggest and the first one is I believe this has to do with the lack of role models and female role models that they have that are leaders and coaches and volunteers in sport. And so when they don't see themselves, there are more male coaches and more male leaders on the coaching side. So it's difficult to get involved in something when you don't see yourself. I will add an additional layer to that to say that there are not very many female leaders in sport of diverse nature. So that makes an additional layer or additional barrier to girls wanting to get involved in sport. The second big barrier that I see is time, in that a lot of girls, as they're growing up, they are taught from a very young age, whether or not in the home, and this is still happening, in the home or in the classroom, that education is paramount. You must do these things in order to be able to go to college, in order to get a good job, so that you can have a family. And so to play sport or be active really, really cuts into that time. So they're unable to be able to get involved into active participation, whether that be at a house league level, whether that is a higher competitive level, because there is not as much emphasis placed on that, and that there is pressure there. And then the last thing is that there are just less opportunities for girls in sport across our country. And if you take those 3 barriers, those would be, in my opinion, the top 3 barriers of why we see less girls involved and young women involved in physical activity.
We have about 2 minutes left, and we've been talking about the lower activity levels during this pandemic. I wanted to get an idea from all of you on, what we should do about it moving forward. George, I'll start with you.
Sure. And I'll build off Dr. Kriellaars' statement that these are alarming levels. In physical education class, the feedback that I'm receiving is kids aren't even lasting the warm up. And we're talking about secondary schools going from 75-minute periods to 2.5 hours. So, how are we reshaping? What does physical literacy look like in health and physical education? Starting off once we get students in kindergarten. What does it look like? What are we teaching? And there's a big difference, and I know Dr. Kriellaars can speak better to this, than between physical activity and physical literacy. Who is teaching the physical literacy? Do we have trained personnel who are teaching young students at the age of 4 what a lunge, what a squat, what a push, what a pull is, in order for them to be successful, to be confident, to get on the climbers when they're outside in recess, to be able then to play at the level that they want to play, to feel like they're part of a team, to feel like, hey, this is fun. No one enjoys it if they're unsuccessful. So how do we make kids more successful? And that's reframing what we used to do and rolling out a ball or letting kids play to putting our efforts into making them more successful in their movements.
Dean, you've got 45 seconds.
Oh, no, quickly. Overall, every child, whether they're male or female, sex assigned at birth, will need the development of physical literacy, which is the competence, confidence, motivation to continue to participate. It's broken because of COVID, but it's been breaking for a long time because of the devaluation of movement in culture. We need all sectors to get together to create physical literacy enriched communities where we can actually work intersectorally to provide these positive movement experiences for all children. And without those, you don't have a whole person being developed, period.
Wow, what a way to end this conversation. Thank you so much to all of you. You've given us so much to think about. We really do appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.